Welcome back to Be the Change podcast with me, Stephanie Howlett, CEO of Diversity NL. Become awakened, create culture of inclusion, be brave, have impact by being an ally. Welcome back to Be the Change podcast. I'm delighted to have with us the infamous Charlie Murphy. Charlie is an activist, certainly well known in the Newfoundland and Labrador community, being an activist for looking at, 2S LGBTQIA. We're going to talk a little bit about some of those acronyms and pronouns. I know your pronouns are he, him, they, and their. You're certainly the executive director of Quadrangle NL. And I think heavy on the activism scene when it comes to many different lenses in which we'll get into. So welcome to the show, and I'm delighted you can be here.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about pronouns, because not everyone knows about pronouns and what they are. Let's tell us a little bit about yours.
Yeah, so I use he, him, they, them pronouns. Even though I'm not non-binary, I always use they, them as well, just because I like normalizing the fact of using they, them. And sometimes, even though I don't identify as being non-binary and wanting to use gender neutral pronouns, I just sometimes I feel like a they, them. I don't feel like a he, him. And also I just find pronouns are kind of a little tricky. They're kind of an interesting thing because a lot of the times they're given to us based on, an individual's perception of us versus our own perception that we're putting out in the world. And so I like having fun with them too, because why not?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a great way to, shall I use the word normalize, but to make it so that it's okay if people are using pronouns, they're just are not he and him and she and her. It's okay to do that. I know people who are part of the straight community that are doing that to make it comfortable for more people to start using pronouns and to look like just to basically say like it's okay. We welcome all different pronouns, all different people from different walks of life to our organization and communities.
Totally. Yeah, it opens the opportunity for people to start talking about pronouns in a way that we haven't in the past, right? Like, even though pronouns have been discussed and talked about for many, many years, decades, it's only now becoming more open and out there to kind of like just ask people like, my name is Charlie Murphy. I use he, him, them, the pronouns. Who are you? Sometimes people feel really comfortable and you kind of open up that space because you're being vulnerable too. And sometimes it's not safe for someone to use their pronouns. So they typically only use their name.
Yeah, and let's talk a little bit about that, because I guess within workplaces and organizations, potentially not everyone knows why a person would not use pronouns. Can you give us a few examples of what that looks like?
Yeah, so I would say from the 2S LGBTQI plus community, it could be a way of outing someone. For example, someone who might be trans, who to their workplace might be perceived as being masculine or male, but they actually identify as being female. And so they might really want to use female pronouns. And that might be outing them in a situation where they're not ready to be outed. They might not feel comfortable. They might not feel safe. A workplace might not be safe, even though some workplaces say that they're accepting and understanding and open. It could put someone in a very vulnerable situation.
Yeah, and absolutely. And the last thing we want to do is put them in a situation where there's some sort of violence, whether that be physical, psychological, because we want to create those respectful, safe places, that are, people can thrive ultimately.
Definitely.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about you. So you've been involved with Quadrangle NL for some 12 years. Is that correct?
Yeah, almost. Yeah. It started so myself and others in 2012. Actually, I should go back a little bit before then. So I moved here in 2009 from Halifax, Nova Scotia. And I moved here for a job in the tech industry. So technically I was working for film and television. And I was moving from Halifax, which had like a very open and visible queer and trans community. And when I moved here, that was the first thing I was nervous about. Was I was coming to terms with who I was understanding who I was, and I was hoping that I'd see something here that I could like gravitate towards and like keep growing as an individual. And when I first moved here, I couldn't really see a visible spot that I could find where I felt comfortable and safe, that I could talk about who I was or what I was trying to understand about myself. And that was really hard because I mean, I was moving from a place that I knew my entire life into my first time ever moving by myself, my entire life, uprooted it and stuck in another spot, and not having any friends here, not having any connections here, not having any understanding of the landscape here. And so I was really looking for that one thing that I knew if I found, I could find commonality with others. And I found that through activism. So I joined a lot of other groups. I was part of Planned Parenthood for a really long time. I joined PFLAG, the St. John's chapter. I created logos for organizations that were doing 2S LGBTQI plus work. And eventually that's where I found community. But within that community, I was noticing and hearing the same kind of things where, you know, there was a peer support group, or there was a camp, or there was this, but there was nothing that was 365 days out of the year that people could go to. There wasn't a touch point that didn't have anything to do strictly with like alcohol or the downtown club scene. There was no place that community could kind of just like be together. And so in 2012, this is, you know, a few years after I've been here, and I felt like, you know, this should be something that exists here, and it should have existed like 30, 40 plus years. And to my knowledge, when myself and others started talking about this, I had no idea that the conversation around a dedicated space and services has been a 40 plus conversation. And so when we started, it was 2012, we sat down as a small group and we basically just popped the question of what if, a whole bunch of what if questions, like what if it was a big building? What if it was a room? What if it was a regular every month thing? What if it was every other weekend? Like, you know, just thinking like, what could this be? If that wasn't a building, is that an event, right? Like, is that all of us going for coffee all together once a month? And what basically came from that 2012 conversation was like, we physically needed a dedicated space. Us going into other spaces and taking over in the sense of like being visible was great and still needs to happen. But there's also the fact of, like we were just talking about pronouns, there are people who know who they are, can express that in a way that is as authentic as they want to be, because they're not sure how someone else is going to react, you know, like, or maybe how a family member is going to react. So if there was a space that allowed for that to exist in a way that was a little bit more organic, maybe more people would be open and willing to kind of like understand themselves and others. And so it kind of from 2012, it kind of spooled into this kind of conversation into like 2015. So between 2012 and 2015, there was a lot of public conversations. We met in like community spaces like Sobeys community hubs. We met in Rocket Bakery was the first time we had a large collection of us. That was myself, Elsa Craig, Bruce Pierce, Gemma Hickey, a few others that basically sat down at a table and basically started talking about this in the sense of like the physical space. And the question that came out was why it wasn't already here. And it came up several times that the space just wasn't a viable option because of funding or because of buy-in from the general community, which I always thought was really interesting, because coming from Halifax, pride was a big thing. The community is very large. And so we started taking that kind of question and we drafted some survey questions. So in 2015, we released a survey of 10 questions asking things like, what would a center provide you? How would you use a center? What does that mean? All of these kind of pieces. And we had 750 people, I think it was, fill it out, or 720 people fill it out in 3 days, and 755 people fill it out after a week. Wow. We still use that data now. We compared it with our most recent survey as well. But in 2015, we took that survey, crafted a business plan, and that business plan was then brought to government. And in 2015, we also incorporated as a non-for-profit. So there was a collection of us that did that. And Dr. Elsa Craig is still one of those co-founders and still on our board. We took that business plan that was drafted by, I'm not going to remember Tamara's last name, I cannot remember it, but an individual who was really kind and took all of our data, like all of our research, our support letters. We had like, I think it was initially 17 or 20 some support letters from different groups and businesses. We crafted that all together and took it to the government as a proposal of like, you know, here's what we'd want to do. And that idea was building a network very similar to the St. John Status of Women and the violence prevention groups, where there was multiple satellites across the province. And sadly, that wasn't accepted in 2015, even though that was an election year. And so we kept going back and forth, like many years. We're still going back and forth with government and talking to them about like why this is impactful and why it's important. But after that, we kind of went back to basics again too, and we started talking to groups like ACNL, so the 8th Committee of Newfoundland and Labrador, who had like a very rich history in supporting the community. And from that, we applied for like startup money for pilot projects kind of thing. We didn't get any, sadly, again. And so we went to, our group kind of went to the other route of saying like, you know what, we're going to just do this ourselves. We're going to get our own charitable status. We're going to put it out there and we'll just keep going from there. And so a lot of things happened between 2015, 2018 and 2019. But then Kai Reese, who is a good friend of mine and others on our board, reached out and said, like, what can we do to help? Are you still trying to do this? And so Kai and several of the students that were in their class, and of course you can see all this information on our website. There's a lovely little timeline with everyone's name in there of like who helped and did what that first few years. And Dr. Suleiman Giwa, who's also on our board now, was the teacher of Kai in the School of Social Work, and they used that as a class project. And so they took all this information and developed this with us, and we applied for our charitable status. We got it in late 2019, and then we were planning on doing like a big old party, because we at that time it was historic, right? We are the first 2S LGBTQI plus registered charity of Newfoundland and Labrador. Like,
yeah,
doing this
it's
work.
massive.
It's massive.
It's massive.
And so we
hard work.
It's very hard work. And like, we wanted to have a great big celebration to celebrate, like, all of this time building up to this momentous occasion. And sadly, we couldn't, right? Like COVID happened, so we couldn't get people together. But that actually supported us in a weird way. We were able to do a lot more online pieces. We learned a lot about being accessible because of it. It allowed us to make our board larger than most other boards might be in scope. We've got 5 regional seats in our bylaws so that we can have someone from all the regions. We currently have, I believe it's 3 now from Labrador, 1 from Corner Brook. And then those seats the other ones remain vacant until someone takes them for those other regions. But then we've now been able to kind of, apply for federal funding. So in 2020, we were awarded $237 or just over $237,000 from the federal government through, I'm going to mess up the name, but I believe at the time it was LGBTQ2 Capacity Building Fund. Since then, the federal government has also changed the acronym to match more closely to what the community uses. But that allowed us to, hire an ED, so myself for full-time and from between 2020 and 2021, or late 2020, I should say. And it allowed us to do all this like outreach work. We did a lot. We did, I think it was 5 outreach pieces online in all the different regions across the province. And we were able to collect information from different people across different walks of life, different intersectionality of what this space needs to be and what we need to be. We also did a needs assessment in 2021. And that needs assessment is basically what we're currently using now to dictate what we make. So like in 2020 or 2015 and 2021, we had those 2 different surveys. So we did a comparison. And between those years, and I think that's like 7 years if I'm doing the math correctly, the increase for peer support and the increase for counseling doubled in both. So I can't remember the exact numbers, but I'm pretty sure counseling went from 30% of the participants to 60% of the participants asked for counseling. So that's why we partnered with Jacob Predister Memorial Foundation to do our counseling line, and that's why we applied for money through Bell Let's Talk and were awarded the $25,000 from them because we talked about the need, and even with our chosen family dinners, all of that stems from that needs assessment, and we're using that data to kind of keep pushing. But yeah, I guess that's kind of like the broader, more probably elaborate answer to that question than you were wanting. But it shows how like things kind of keep adding to what was done in the past or what was done 6 months ago or a year ago, and not giving up. being persistent, and that, maybe something we didn't work, but something from it is a nugget of, inspiration to pull from for the next thing.
Absolutely. And, I think most of our listeners and people would know that it's hard work when you're looking at non-for-profit, when you're looking at where do you get monies from, constantly looking for funding sources and grants and to be supported. I'm just wondering, through your statistics, did
Mhm.
numbers come out of, do we have a guesstimate? I guess, like, through research I did, like, I have a guesstimate of how many numbers without through Newfoundland, Labrador, and Canada, how many people identify as being part of this, beautiful 2S LGBTQIA plus community. Do you have
Yeah.
a number that you can share?
So we don't have a number of like as an exact number,
Right.
but what we've done through is basically, I'm sure maybe similar to what you might have done, where it's like 3 to 11% is, or 4 to 11% is kind of what's dictated as part of the community based on
Mhm.
the on Stats Canada. I believe it's 4%. And then when it comes to more queer and trans research, it's closer to 11.
Mhm.
And the reason why I kind of say like 4 to 11% is it's based on who's doing the research, right? Like who's asking those
Mhm.
questions. Um,
Right.
if you have a 2S LGBTQI plus group, and I switch back and forth between the acronym and saying queer and trans often,
Mhm.
but the reason why I say that is when we did our work, we've always had people fill out our surveys start to finish. There's no
Mhm.
piece that's being left out. When straight organizations or governing bodies that aren't 2S LGBTQI plus specific, there are times where people don't feel comfortable saying certain pieces of their identity, right? Like we don't know how that gets used in the long run, right? But when an organization that is about us and for us is looking for that information, there's more of a give, because they know it's going to be used to benefit them and their community, not just this harvesting of information. So we don't have an exact number, but I can tell you right now, we've helped over last year, in our annual report, we had 500 plus individuals that we've supported. Uh, we have given out, when it comes to like food insecurity pieces in 2020, between 2020 and 2021, we gave out over $14,000 within food.
Wow.
To, I think it was 231 either families or individuals looking for food within the community. Some of our events has had over 75 people online to 100 people online, depending on what it was, during the height of COVID. Our chosen family dinner had 65 people register, and we fed over 80.
Wow.
Yeah, so
Those are
like
big numbers.
they're not small numbers, like they're very
Yeah.
large. And then if we go into some of our programming, like our visibility program, and I know this might sound a little bit funny because it's just stickers, but it's not just stickers. We have given over 16,000 stickers alone. That's not including our flags, that's not including our buttons. That is just stickers across our province, from here in St. John's all the way up to Nain in Labrador. So when you look at that, it's kind of shocking to think, like, a small organization at the time, even though we're growing now, giving out 16 stickers, mailing, I think it was over 200 flags, I think now is what we're at, giving away for free. Pins and stuff like that is also in the thousands. I think that's 2,000 that pins we've given out or more of specific things. So you look at those kind of numbers and you're just kind of blown away. I think the last time I looked at the merchandise that we were giving away, which was in August. I haven't looked at it in the most recent times because we have a facilitator now that does our programming with that kind of work. But when I looked at it last August, we had, I think it supported almost 2,000 people at that point. In total, all of our merch, I think we're getting closer to, like, I don't even know, like we've given out so much stuff, it's unreal. Like most of our support now with that program is stickers, buttons, and pins, but that's funded through RBC Foundation, and it's phenomenal. It's phenomenal to think like something as simple as a pin or a button or a sticker is in that high demand, for visibility's sake.
100%. But I mean, think back to high school. Like when I was in high school, there was no way in hell that you would ever put like a t-shirt like this on that says "Live Your Life." You
No.
would never put a flag of any sort on you unless you wanted a target on your back and to be bullied and harassed. And you and I know within our communities, life is not all rainbows and butterflies. Right, like parts of our communities have it really tough. I'm going to suggest parts of our trans community. There's a whole lot of trans hate. We've seen it through social media. I've seen it locally, just in I live in a town of Goals, and I've seen it, you know, just fags, different things being wrote on, school rounds,
Yep.
go home faggot, don't know why you're here. Like all sorts of trans hate and hate in general towards our 2S LGBTQIA plus community is, it's alive and well, which a lot of people like to think it's not, that we're so accepting as Newfoundlanders and Labradorians and as Canadians. We think these things just happened in the US, but we know that they don't. Can you comment on some of that?
Yeah, I mean, like a prime example of that is we've had flags being burnt during Pride season, flags being found in sewage pipes. Um, and that's a piece of fabric to somebody, but that's a whole other thing
Mm,
to another individual, right? Like that is their beacon of I'm not by myself, I'm not alone. Um, I have some kind of connection to someone else. And a bigger thing, right? That you can feel that you're not just the one only queer trans individual in, a community of 200 people. We have people in our
mhm,
province who are in small towns and quite literally could be the only queer person or trans person in that group. Um, and are feeling like they're by themselves, right? Because like they don't have access to certain things, or certain individuals to talk about stuff. But when I look at things like before I first moved here, I was visiting my parents, because my dad and my stepmom lived here before I moved here. And there's a space between the rooms and Harvey's Road and Military Road where it's like that
mhm,
gray brick wall. Um, and when I first moved here, faggot was spray painted across that in big, big letters. Um, and I think I was maybe 19, 20, maybe 21 at the time. Um, and that was before I contemplating moving here. I was going to school, but my stepmom and my dad lived here. And I remember seeing that and being like, automatically just feeling really uncomfortable and not feeling overly. I felt like I moved from a place that was somewhat more understanding. Like I never felt super threatened in Halifax. And I was naive. I mean, I was entering into my early 20s, so I could have been easily targeted in Halifax. I was very naive. Um, but like you look at the visibility differences where you've got a bar, you've got a big pride organization, you've got a big festival. And then when I moved here, you see faggot spray painted in pink letters across something, and you're like, do they have a pride here? Do they have a bar here? Like your brain automatically like switches from being like feeling like yourself to almost like watching where you're stepping, right? Like
mhm,
I think like that's the biggest thing that I find interesting too within the community is like we have a lot of hate that's spewed at us during Pride specifically, but that's because that's our most visible time, right? Like so that's when people do come out of the woodworks to basically make you feel a certain way, make you feel small, make you feel excluded, make you feel like you're the other, of a group. And so it's hard. Like I mean, like we were talking about before, like schools have changed. Schools have um, done a lot of good when it comes to making things a little bit more safer. But then if you look at some of the EGAL Canada statistics around the effectiveness
mhm,
of teachers listening to students when they're being told they're being picked on, they're being harassed, they're being bullied, they're being, violence is being thrown at them. And you look at those statistics of like teachers are not being effective in what they're doing around protecting 2S LGBTQI plus youth. Then when you look at racialized members of our community and how they're not being, protected and supported, like it's just it goes on and on. I just feel like during Pride though, it's one of those times where it's like we are so visible that that's when a lot of people start doing like taking flags or yelling things or the comments. I mean, any post or any 2S LGBTQI plus happy news or sad news gets awful comments, like awful comments. Um, and I know people do the whole like avoid the comment section, but the sad thing about that is like you can ignore it, right? Like ignoring it means like you're just putting your blinders up to something that's a very obvious issue and a very obvious piece of violence, right? Like if it's not in the comments, it could very well be in the streets.
Are you wondering how you can be the change within your organization? Are you struggling with where to start to on diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging? If so, reach out to me, Stephanie Howlett, CEO of Diversity NL. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. We can help. We can help you be the change. We can help you make impact. We can help you and your organization through this process. Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, we've seen that, and I always say that Pride is 365. So organizations, if you want to talk, get at us. 365 days a year. It's not just during that one, the Pride March, the St. John's Pride March, which is our biggest one. Of course, it happens all across the province. Different smaller municipalities, raised their flags, and which is fantastic. And by the way, I think every municipality, should be respectful and should raise pride flags. Or progress flags, or a flag to support communities, just looking at like who can I help and who's within the space of our community, whether that big or small. St. John's, Mount Pearl, Paradise, whomever, right? Small municipalities. And some of the smallest municipalities have raised pride flag, which like creates a smile on my face, like going by, it's like, wow, like they're such a small organization and they have a progress or pride flag out. It's just like, and it's like they get it. They get that we want to see that creates that brightness, right? Like when I go down Kenmount Road or Topsail Road or some of the roads and see all the pride flags, it's just like it just makes you feel great, right? Unfortunately, the week later when it gets taken down or a couple of days later, it's just like, now are we back to always the thoughts? Are we back to discrimination, harassment, and bullying? Like, what does that look like? So I think, like organizations, like what can they do to kind of, I guess, be supportive of the communities that we're both part of?
Yeah, I mean, like I look at it from two different lenses. So businesses, when I look at organizations that are a for-profit business, I always say like, have training, like go do the training, understand like pronouns, understand the community, understand making sure that your space is a safer space. And I always say safer because it's really hard to make something 110% safe. We always do try our best, but sometimes, undue harm, not meaning to, kind of happens. And that could be the smallest thing or the biggest thing. So the training is always important. So seek out training and be involved in Pride. Like, yes, we do have Pride that is a festival, but like you said, like it's 365 days a year. So think about when you're if a business is wanting to support something, look at groups that are doing work all year round. That is my main thing. Look at organizations that are not just the festival too, that are doing work all year round. But then also support the small prides. Like St. John's Pride has the magnifying glass on it because it's one of the biggest ones in the province, right? But there are ones in Corner Brook, there are ones in Stephenville, there are ones in Fogo Island, and there's ones, all at Port Rexton. Like they're all over the place. So reach out and support more than just one if possible. Like spread that around. And then when I look at organizations like charities or entities that are doing work but aren't necessarily doing work within the community, to look to the organizations that are doing the work in the community and help support them to uplift their work. Right now, I'm seeing a lot of like 2S LGBTQI plus groups or programs popping up in entities that aren't necessarily 2S LGBTQI plus, because now after the struggle, and we're still struggling, but after the struggle that people have gone through, 2S LGBTQI plus is getting access to money. We're getting access to funding. And so I would be remiss if I didn't say, please, organizations that don't typically do 2S LGBTQI plus work, but have years of knowledge of doing work within the community, to partner with entities that are doing this work. Help them get to the same kind of generational knowledge that you might have, so that we can do the work for and by our community, because we know what we need. I think those are the two the two pieces that I would say around that, just because I think they're two different types when you look at organizations where you're looking at a for-profit and a not-for-profit.
Absolutely. And I know that there's a lot of organizations that are, I think, really trying to be open. I say open their minds and open their hearts, and wanting to learning all about, I think, the 2S LGBTQIA plus community, and other historically excluded communities, of course, because, within our community as well, I mean, we have people who are two-spirited, Indigenous. We have people who are with disabilities. We have people who are racialized, people who are Black, brown. We have people who are of different disabilities, abilities. So we have people of, I guess, all the historically excluded communities that are part of our community. Because I think people just think, oh, well, queer. Like, you know what I mean? Like people just, kind of label and break it down into bits and pieces. But I think overall, when we start to look at a term that maybe everyone's familiar with, is intersectionalities. It's how we identify as people, and everyone's intersectionality is quite different. I'm sure you've had conversations and have conversations with people about intersectionalities and what that looks like. Any thoughts on that? Like, how do we talk about, and how do we really support people with their intersectionality?
Totally. So I just want to go back a bit to what you were saying about the exclusionary piece, because I don't think
Yes.
we should think that the queer and trans community hasn't been part of that problem. We've been pretty complacent, not standing up and doing our part, because the fact that we have also excluded people within our own within our own community.
Yeah.
And the reason why I bring that up is because the movement of 2S LGBTQI plus folks did not start from a white person, right? Like it was started by a trans individual of color. And so Marsha P. Johnson, right? Like you look at these, and Sylvia Plath, not Sylvia Plath, Sylvia Rodriguez. I'm trying to remember how to pronounce their last name. But it's those pieces that we have to, you have to remember that, like, we were part of excluding people. We were part of, like, keeping people in a certain place, and us, stepping forward. And then if you put that even into a more like micro level, we put gay white men above everyone else in our community, right? Like, and that was the poster child. And I feel like that's where a lot of the times now, when people are saying, people still say sometimes like gay pride, and a lot of people are trying to pull back, being like, no, it's just pride. Don't label it that way, because that excludes individuals who have been excluded for generations, just because you want to keep something because that's what you felt it's been called, and you're part of that community, and therefore you feel really, ownership and passion to it. But yeah, like I look at that being like, we have to atone and understand, like, we've also been part of the exclusion of many communities, including those who are racialized, those who are part of the disability community, those who are newcomers, like everything. And so when I look at that from our perspective, I try our best through Quad to be as understanding and open to everyone's intersectionality. Myself, I'm a white cis. I use queer, but technically, I guess if you're using the terms that are also under the umbrella, a bi individual. But I also come from, a separated family who, it was a messy divorce, and all of that kind of stuff. But I don't have the same kind of intersectionalities as someone who would be a person of color, queer and trans, right? Like, it's different. It's very, very different. And so when I look at that kind of stuff, we have to be aware of it. We have to be conscious of that, the fact that we have to do better, and we have to step into that and own it. And so Quad does a lot of work around talking to people around what they need, what they want. We did an IDA policy to support some of that work. We've done an anti-racist policy to support some of that work. And so when we look at those documents, that is kind of like our guiding model now. So we try to make sure that we always have ASL at our events as much as we can. It's costly, but we do our best. We always try to make sure that we're in accessible locations. So, for example, we did our holiday party at the farmers market, or the community market, as it's also known, at 245 Freshwater, because it's the most accessible, like, building probably in the entire city. We try to make sure when we do things like supper that people's dietary restrictions are appreciated and looked at. So we had a turkey dinner. Someone said they couldn't have rosemary. We didn't cook with rosemary. So there's certain things that we have to kind of like step in and to do. When we look at our online presence, we do our best to make sure that we have alt text. So we put that in the actual copy and in the image most times. And that does take extra time, right? Like it does take, the extra time to like do those pieces, but we try to do our part to make sure that we're doing it as much as we can. We partner with other organizations. So I know you mentioned before we started recording, Kathy from Empower, wonderful person, like amazing. And I don't know how many times I've wrote to her saying like, what do I need? What do I do? I look at some of the other groups that we partner with, like YWCA, Choices for Youth, right? Like there's all of these pieces where like you can't do it by yourself. You just can't, right? Like there's no point in pretending you can. And that's where I've been trying to infuse as much as I possibly humanly can into Quad, as being like, be collaborative, make partnerships, make programs together. There's like our mission with Quad is the building, right? Like that is our main goal, is building and services. We don't have to do the services ourselves. We just want them to be available.
100%. And partnerships is massive. I mean, like, so, you learn through business that there's so many parts and so many parts of the community. I mean, we're part of the local DEIB NL network. It's kind of unnamed, was just kind of the name that was thrown on it, to provide support so that we're not working in silos, because it's hard work in this space, heavy lifting, a lot of serious conversations, and I guess to your point, like learning, like, asking people to learn, asking people to be open to partner, and what that looks like. I mean, so if someone wanted to partner with Quad, how would they partner with you? How would they get in touch with you?
They could just reach out to me. So my email is executivedirector@thequadnl.com. We also have, on our website, you can find all of our staff. So if there's something specific you want to talk to one person about, we're on social media. So Twitter, actually Twitter right now, I don't know how that's going. I've been hearing some not so great stuff. So I'm not sure how that's going to go, if we're going to stick with it yet or not. And then Facebook and Instagram, of course. So we were on all of those kind of like major social media platforms. They can call me. So my number is 769-2355. I mean, we really want to partner with people. Like that's kind of our goal, is like do things together. And I'm not going to say that we've not made any like missteps or like fumbles, because that would be completely wrong. There are things that, like you learn as you do, as best you can. But we're trying to make sure that we can do everything we can to make sure that the community is getting what they need and the organization is getting what it needs to survive and keep going. Like you mentioned earlier, funding is a huge problem. We currently get no funding from the provincial government. I don't think many people know that. I think some people think that we are funded by the government here in Newfoundland and Labrador. We are not. We only get federal funding based on projects. So the first one we get was our capacity building grant, which is what allowed us to do all the stuff we've done up to this point. And then a lot of the other projects are based on partnerships. So like I mentioned before, we have some great partnerships with groups like Choices for Youth. So we have an individual that we share kind of like through staffing. We work with CBRC, which is the Community-Based Research Center. We've got a staff member who's like 50% covered by that project. And then we've got staff that are covered by, other federal and other pots of funding, right? So like it's one of those things where people assume we are funded, we're good to go, we're big, we're massive. We are so small, so small still. We are just starting on the journey of what we want and where we want to go. But we've done some pretty incredible things. I feel very proud of what we've been able to do. But I think there's also, like, we have compassion for the work we do. I think we need to make sure that the members of our community have compassion for those who are doing that work too. So when we look at the intersectionality piece. Like sometimes people mess up, sometimes people have moments that they don't see everything, but they are trying. And I know that might not be the most like blank statement to be like people are trying, but people are trying. Like there are people like they're really trying to do the best they can with as little resources as they have.
Absolutely. And I understand that you're going to have an announcement coming up pretty soon. You're going to be opening the doors to the new Quad Community
Yeah,
Center. Any information you can share with us? Any teasers?
totally. So it is in a central location of the city. So anyone can walk there, drive there, bus there. It is accessible. It has a lift, which is just like a almost like an elevator that you just like push a button and you go up and down kind of thing. It's inside another space. So it's not like it's a self-contained space or self-contained building right now. It's open concept. What else can I kind of tease out? I'm really excited to start talking about it more. I know like right now we've been.
When's the date? When's the official date?
So that I don't know because we said like over a month ago that we have our space, and I've been trying to like pick away at certain things because there's way more involved in like safety than you realize. So like we have to pick up some first aid kits, and we have to make sure that like everyone that's in our staff understands like the fire exits and stuff like that, and those pieces. But we've been able to start doing small things like taking on volunteers. So we did some onboarding. I think it was like 2.5 weeks, maybe 3 weeks ago now, maybe more. So we had 10 individuals sign up. So we have 10 volunteers that have gone through our onboarding, and some that are currently finishing our take home portion. So we'll have staff and volunteers to be able to do all the stuff we need to do within the space.
Amazing. Congrats. That's big.
Yeah, it's huge.
Well done.
Yeah. It's getting there. But I'm hoping we'll be releasing soon. If it's not this month, it'll be June because it needs to open. Like we need to tell people, we need to get some numbers. But it won't be an open 9 to 5 right at the start kind of thing. It will be us picking certain days out of the week. It will be us picking certain programs to happen. So some of the stuff that we've talked about doing out of the center now are like book clubs, game nights, movie nights, socials, pizza parties, like that kind of thing. We've got books that people can borrow. It's stuff like that we're opening the door to opportunities, but we're doing it in a way that we're controlling the floodgates. Not that we think like, everyone's going to be like, oh, I want to go to the center, but we're not sure, right? Like we don't know what the outcome will be. And again, we're learning from our partners like Choices for Youth, who opened a center for youth and were inundated when they open their doors, right? We don't know what that looks like for us. So we're being cautious of like managing it.
Absolutely. Because it has to be done safely, like you said, is of the utmost importance. And, hopefully, a lot of people show and give support, not even just people that are part of the community like we are, but other people who are allies and accomplices and friends and promoters and supporters, because we need that as part of this community. The thing that we do need the most, honestly, is accomplices, people that are going to work on this together with us and support us through this.
100%. We need our champions in and outside of our communities.
We do.
And like our space still is kind of bare. We're looking at what we need to purchase. So if anyone's out there and wants to donate like money for us to buy a coach or a nice big TV or a nice board table, like we've got small things that we've cobbled together. But we're still looking at like our grocery list of like, what is it we need? And again, like I said, this is not our permanent location. This is just something to grow from. We currently got some funding around a feasibility study, and we're working on some business plans around how much we would need and what it would take to create Quad as an incubator for 2S LGBTQI+ businesses. So example, how many small businesses do you need to fit in a building to make the building self-sustainable? That's what we're currently looking at. So following models like the art gallery down on Kitty Vitty and the St. John's Farmers Market, where it comes to like this kind of kiosk idea of space. And so that plan looks at like things like a private clinic that a doctor might want to have a private clinic out of for our community, by the community, a counselor maybe, or we looked at things like an archive We looked at things like a coffee shop. So all of these things that would then kind of be capsulated in a space
Right.
that would then generate the income to, not have to worry about the income of the building.
Right.
Yeah. So hopefully those kind of things come into place and all pan out, because finding money for staff, finding money for building, finding money for programming, super challenging.
Absolutely. So anyone who's out there, please connect in with Charlie. Please support Pride Month's coming, and certainly they'll, take your money for a lovely receipt, and it'll be used for goodness. And truly, we do need people's support. We do need people to reach out, provide support in all sorts of different ways, whether that's volunteer, partnering, mentoring, being accomplices and allies, for
Mhm.
sure. Any final words?
My final words will be, it just takes time. And I'm not a patient person. So I have to listen to that all the time too. But I just want to put that out there for the community members who are in our community to listen and hear, like, it takes time for us to get where we want to go. But we're getting there. But just have a little bit of time, give us a little bit of time, and have a little bit of patience, because it pays off if we just kind of like slow down, let people process and get through the stuff we have to get through, because there's a lot of red tape that I didn't even realize until you start walking through the amount of red tape.
Absolutely. Well, I'm so excited for you and for the board of directors and from all the community that's come together to do this heavy lifting and hard work. I'm so appreciative when we always get to talk and connect in. So thank you for that. And thank you to everyone that's been involved with Quad NL. I think it's truly needed. And I can't wait to walk through the door and see the amazing work that you've put into this organization, into this center. I look forward to it. So thank you so much for sharing today.
Anytime. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure. Thank you so much. Thanks for joining us today on Diversity NL. Stay tuned next week. It's going to be some exciting guests. Please feel free to comment below, subscribe, connect with me on LinkedIn, and think about how are you going to be a change maker in your organization. You can do this.